Hello my friends, Takuya here, and welcome back to another alternate history Hearts of Iron 4 video. I swear to God, you all hate me. At this point, you all know how this works. The top 4 most liked comments, or I should say the suggestions that go into each of my videos, then gets placed into a poll in order for us to choose the next alternate history scenario that we try and create in this godforsaken game. And you all really wanted to punish me with this one. By a massive amount, with 30,000 votes that went into this. What if the Japanese saved the Russian Imperial family? Which, I need to show this whole comment that this original thing is even based off here in the first place. What if at the start of the Siberian intervention, the Japanese find either Alexiev, installing him as a puppet ruler, or one of his sisters, whom is then married into the royal family to give him enough legitimacy to remain in Siberia? Dear God, man. I'm not gonna lie, I actually spent many hours trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do in order to make this thing even possible in the first place, because the amount of possibilities that this could really spiral off into, or how long it would take for me to develop the scenario in the first place, was mind-numbing. Luckily, I managed to figure out that it should be kind of possible in Great War Redux, the World War I mod, which, as it turns out, actually got a really big update. Now more developed than ever, we're going to be tackling the Japanese in World War I, the story of which is rather fascinating, as we're going to be explaining here. From the start of the game here, we actually have Mutsuhito, which is Emperor Meiji, the guy who kicked off the Meiji Restoration in the first place, who is in charge of our country, which is fascinating to see. You still have state Shintoism, you have the Zaibatsu factor, and simultaneously a naval arms race, which again, all fascinating. But my friends, before we go any further into things that are further destabilizing, why not actually stabilize yourself by investing properly in the future? It may sound like a segue, but I'm serious. Considering every single thing that we've actually covered here on this channel, usually one of the most common overarching themes is hyperinflation and government spending way too much money, which in turn is something that is tied to inflation, which doesn't end well for pretty much anyone. As long as geopolitics keeps on churning out interesting events, that means that I'm going to have quite a lot to cover. So, when every financial thing that you know is unstable, what is there to do? Invest in gold. And that, my friends, is where the sponsor of today's video, Lear Capital, comes in. I'm actually really happy to be working with Lear Capital because they specialize in helping people like you and me grow our wealth with gold. Just considering the sheer volatility of economic and political events that are set to happen in the near future, and considering what has happened in the first month of 2025 alone, I can only imagine what is going to be happening to the market. Investing in precious metals right now could be easily the difference between you growing your wealth or losing it, not just maintaining the status quo. And so when it comes to buying those precious metals, you need the right company behind you, and that's honestly why I trust Lear Capital. With over 27 years of experience, thousands of 5-star reviews, and over $3 billion in trusted transactions, Lear knows what they're doing. So look, I genuinely mean this. Now is the time to take action and get educated on alternative investments like gold and silver. Call my sponsor, Lear Capital, today at 855-271-1871, or go to my link down in the description and get your free gold and silver wealth protection kit. And as a special offer, if you open a qualified account, you will also get up to $15,000 in bonus coins. That is 855-271-1871. Again, call 855-271-1871 or go to my link. Thank you, Lear Capital, for sponsoring me here today, and I hope to God you all are safe in the future. To that end, we're starting here in May of 1910, and I'm going to explain a little bit of what Japan did in World War I so you understand the scenario that we're making in the first place. First off, the entire premise that we are creating here is based around the Russian Civil War, something that is only going to take place when the Russian Empire inevitably ends up collapsing once the Germans are able to push deep enough into it. And then you have the Bolshevik Revolution and everything goes to crap. This, of course, spawns the Russian Civil War, an event that lasted, well, several years, costing millions of lives, and multiple powers would end up intervening in it, which wouldn't necessarily really matter because the Bolsheviks would still end up winning. The whites, who had fled all the way over here to Siberia, the ones that still supported the monarchy, would ultimately end up losing, and from that, the coalition forces of the Japanese, the Americans, and I think the British also had some forces over here as well, they would ultimately end up withdrawing. So while I may not be able to create the scenario exactly with finding a lost imperial relative and being able to put them on the throne of something here in the East, we can kind of roleplay and say that that's what happens, but we're really going to have to build up the scenario to kind of showcase what it's going to look like here on the map. And in order for that to happen, well, certain things are going to have to happen before that. So yeah, the way that we're going to need to build up the scenario for any of this to be possible in the first place is that we need a stronger Japan, something that actually has more of the support of its allies, which is So yeah, in order to actually make this scenario possible, we're going to need World War I to basically follow the same kind of pattern that it already did, except we are going to need to have Japan be stronger. Historically, what Japan had done is it joined the Entente and pretty much took that as an early opportunity to be able to seize any of the German colonial possessions here in Asia, such as here at Tsingtao, and also the varying different little islands that Germany had as part of its colonial empire, as minuscule as that was. Japan would take the early parts of 1914 heading into 1915 and pretty much seize all of that before doubling down on trying to bully China, which is something that actually pissed off a number of the other powers, and that is something that weakened Japan. First things first, following the historical route, diplomatic efforts are to be made, and afterwards Korea is annexed because, well, there's not really anything that they could do for that. A whole what if Korea resisted the Japanese annexation of it is a fascinating scenario, though pretty much impossible as it is at this time, but I'm still curious to see if that actually makes it in the future, into a future story. Research-wise, we're going to need to get the basics out of the way. Everything in the beginning here is going to be about strengthening the state, which that is pretty much everything that Japan is able to do from the very get-go. What is fascinating to note about this mod, though, is the way that they weakened Japan. So Japan has a very weak economy in the beginning, which it's something that is fairly freshly industrialized as it is. It was already able to beat Russia in the previous years in the Russo-Japanese War. But the problem is that Japan is not a very resource-rich nation, and this is represented in the game by the fact that it literally has just like a maximum of 10 steel, which is absolutely atrocious. With basically nothing in the way of resources, one of the things that would drive Japanese expansion over the course of, well, World War I, the interwar period, and then World War II was that desire, that drive to obtain resources. And that is precisely what we are going to be seeking here, which, you know, if they actually gave Japan resources in the beginning, this means that anyone playing this mod would probably just go on a warpath as Japan and do whatever it is that they want. And that can't really happen by virtue of the mod itself. To that end, first things first, build up our infrastructure and then get some factories going. We have a very basic but prominent military industry from the beginning, so we're going to go ahead and get some guns, we're going to get some artillery, and that's pretty much all it is that we can do here for a while. Considering how much of a deficit we actually have here in steel now, that means that we're going to have to buy quite a bit of it, the majority of which will likely be obtained from the United States, as it was fairly historically, in order to be able to maintain positive relations. Besides that, we'll take our very sizable army, put that into one group, and then there's not really much that we can do with that. You're going to see a lot of time skips over the course of this period because, well, Japan isn't really going to do anything until World War I itself breaks out. With our initial run of political power, we're going to go ahead and get our army expert, as Japan was still a militarized state at this time. Not to the degree that it would become later on. This is still something that under Emperor Meiji was nominally militaristic, but it was going to become significantly more so after the ease at which Japan would win things in World War I. That is a whole other thing right there. Still, the Army and Navy were constantly competing with one another, and that is something that is going to have to be balanced as time goes on, but first things first, the Japan-Korea Annexation Treaty. Korea has long been a puppet state of our empire, but it would serve better as a territory. If we force the puppet emperor into an annexation agreement, we can knock it off the map in a fashion just seemingly diplomatic enough to keep Europe and the Americans off our backs, which will establish our first territory on the Asian mainland. So, just as in our own timeline, Japan would annex Korea. This would be the first stages of the Empire of Japan growing. From here, it is at the point that we can truly see the beginning of Japanese expansionism. The most logical solution to Japan's issue of low amounts of natural resources and tenuous defensive position is simply to expand outwards. If we expand into the Asian mainland and further out in the Pacific, we will control the supplies we need and the outpost we deserve. This is pretty much the mentality of Japan, so we can argue in this case that perhaps it had an even more expansionist attitude than it did in our own timeline, that the people were willing to dedicate more resources towards expansionist efforts. Of course, that opportunity for Japan is not going to come unless it is able to modernize itself, and this is something that Japan would heavily focus on in the beginning from the early 1910s through World War I, is specifically building itself up. In fact, World War I would end up serving as a massive opportunity for the Japanese to drastically expand their industrial base, as the varying different powers would buy goods from Japan, thus allowing it to supercharge its own economy, much in the same way has actually happened with the United States. Japan experienced their own industrial boom because of World War I. Now, one of the early questions that Japan is going to face is where exactly it's going to focus its resources, on mainland focus and industrial efforts, or if it's going to focus on more of its dockyards to project naval power. Now, historically, what they had done is they did project naval power, and this is one of the key things, is that Japan would actually end up being dominated later on by the naval efforts of the state. However, in the beginning, the army did have quite a bit of influence, and theoretically, for the event that we are trying to build, or the scenario that we are trying to build, I should say, then the army, we're going to say, actually had more influence to be able to get more soldiers, to be able to intervene in the mainland. At least that's the idea that we're going with. So, mainland focus, sure. The suspicious movement of the Koreans. Koreans continue to resist our domination, especially a few days ago. We captured the movement of Koreans to organize the independence army and arrested the leaders. We have to move preemptively. If we arrest and detain all the suspicious people at all, we will avoid danger. Which, yeah, we can go, nah, it's fine, and it causes quite a bit of loss. Or we can go ahead, which reduces compliance and everything, but it increases stability. And yeah, that's the thing. The Japanese occupation of Korea was brutal, and we're going to continue is pretty much the same way. We're going to say that even at this time, they perhaps put even more effort into pacifying the Koreans, and from there gained a stronger Japanese presence in Asia. High treason incident. The Japanese Gendarme has arrested a number of supporters of the anarcho-communists suspected of preparing terrorist attacks. Further investigation revealed that many of them planned to attack the imperial family in the coming weeks. Anarchists even suggested that they would be able to kill the emperor, but they did not succeed. This incident has weakened the organization of anarchist cells, as well as the influence of leftist forces in the imperial diet. God save the emperor. Yes, this is something that Japan in the early days of this time actually had to deal with its own kind of communist elements that it was fighting, much in the same way as many parts of Europe and what they had. That perhaps is going to be something that's going to be more relevant later. Still, prior to that, Japan is just going to be building up its industry. Of course, the most interesting thing to actually occur would be the Xinhai Revolution. Discontent with the rule of the Qing dynasty and the opposition to reform, revolutionaries led by Li Yuanhong had risen up in the province of Hubei. Although small, they managed to repel counterattacks from the new army. In addition to Hubei, the Bogd Khanate and the Uriankai Republic have declared their independence in the north. In other areas of the dynasty, local leaders have begun declaring independence and fighting local garrisons. The strength of the dynasty is weaker than ever, and international observers are unsure if the dynasty will be able to subdue the revolutionaries. Yes, this is the thing that would really spark something in Japan. Right as it was in the midst of rural reforms, it would take the opportunity of the Xinhai Revolution to really, well, start to put pressure upon the Chinese. With the Chinese nation in a state of heavy civil war, Japan can easily profit off their misery. Perhaps if we're lucky enough, we could even force them into the status of a puppet state. Ultimately, just in our own timeline, the Xinhai Revolution would be a success. But while the revolutionaries would make many different promises to different groups in order to be able to take power, they weren't able to necessarily do much in the first place. The overall republic, the new state, was not exactly going to be a stable one. So to that end, Japan would just continue to try and develop itself and build up its influence here on the mainland, in particular dealing with the railroad network that exists here in Manchuria, which it eventually was going to try and seize for itself, though we're going to do things a little bit differently in this timeline. Yet, arguably one of the greatest changes that was going to come to Japan is that in 1912, Meiji would die. On June 30th, 1912, the Meiji Jidai came to an end. Japan's greatest emperor, Meiji, after 44 long years in power, finally could rule no more. Already a grand shrine, the Meiji Jingu, is under construction in Tokyo. His son, Yoshihito, has taken office. With that, we have Emperor Taisho. From here, as the middle of 1912 rolls around, it is here that Japan would begin to focus on more political efforts, specifically trying to assert its position within the Pacific and simultaneously building up relations with those around it, building up relations with the United States, with Britain, with the powers that it sees itself as potentially having future alliance options with. And the thing that we're going to say here is that perhaps these efforts are more fruitful than they were in our own time. They were already successful, but we will say that maybe they were slightly more successful. Relations were slightly more friendly. That Japanese didn't rock the boat as much as they did in our own timeline, at least not in the beginning. While the Pacific is rightfully ordained Japanese territory, there are technically enough islands to share with our so-called friends. For now, Japan's first focus will be the islands of our regional rivals, which we must expand into at any cost. So no, we are not going to support the Filipino separatists and actually try to piss off the United States. No, instead, we are going to improve relations with the USA. The Americans are on-again, off-again friends of Japan. Sometimes we are mutual allies trying to keep peace and go against Europe, and sometimes we are bitter rivals fighting each other for Pacific influence. Today, to ensure the Entente war plans don't fall apart, we shall be friends. Of course, China was not going to be stable during this time, and yet another revolution was going to break out. This was going to be an extremely messy thing that would ultimately result in the state breaking apart into varying different warlord entities, which Japan would take full advantage of to try and exploit as they will. Here then, as 1913 begins to approach 1914, is where another pivotal decision has to be made: strengthening the military or engaging in democratic reforms. At this point, we're going to then say, just like historically what happens, is that the military gains more influence within the country. In fact, we can even argue that in this case, the army gains even more influence than it did in our own time versus the navy, because that in turn allows it to gain more priority when it comes to Korea as well as the northern territories. Emperor Meiji overthrew the shogun and began to steer our empire in a new direction, away from isolationism and to exercising its might as a world power. What sort of nation would we be to turn our back on this move now? By continuing this direction, Japan's place in the world would be solidified. Phan Boi Chau visit. The Vietnamese revolutionary Phan Boi Chau and his colleague, the Crown Prince, visited the country to ask for our attention and support in the emancipation of Vietnam from French rule. Under protectorate for more than 30 years, the revolutionaries wished to liberate the country and establish a republic, or an independent empire in the Japanese style. If the proposal is daring, it could put us at odds with France, if the latter were to learn of it. Well, yeah, this is not the historical action here. We're not going to do this. Theoretically, this is one of the funny things. This is another alternate history event that could happen of what if Japan had actually sided with, well, the Central Powers, not with the Entente. So no, this is not going to be done. In fact, as we enter 1914, it is here that Japan would likely begin preparations for war, though maybe not necessarily in this case when focusing on the Entente and Europe. No, it is just this is a point in which Japan would gradually militarize itself in preparation for things in Asia. The suspicious movement of Koreans. Recently, a movement for the independence of the abdominalism was detected in Korea. We were able to arrest 2 members of the gang, and we got some rough information on them, named Greater Korean Independence Righteous Military Government. They even seem to be moving under the royal edict of Gojong, the abdicated Korean emperor. Well, yeah, arrest them. Naturally, we don't want anything to end up going wrong, and historically, that is exactly what would happen here. Still, the major thing that would spark World War I is the same in this timeline as it was in our previous timeline. Franz Ferdinand gets assassinated, World War I gets ready to begin, and this is the point in which Japan would prepare to make its entry. As the armies across Europe mobilize, this is where Japan sees an opportunity to strengthen and increase its presence in Asia. With the refusal of Austrian demands, the Great War breaks out, and from this, Japan begins to move. Of course, just as in our own timeline, Japan would lay claim to the Pacific Islands, and from that, join the Entente. The Central Powers are far too tied up in Europe to do anything about Japan's expansionism, luckily for us. By becoming a full-fledged member of the Entente, we could take control over the entire German Pacific, and quite easily, to boot. With Japan joining the war, the thing that would occur in rapid order is launching of strikes to take the German colonies, as many as they possibly could. Ultimately, with the islands being barely defended by a local police force, the Germans were in no position to really resist, which meant that Japan had an exceptionally easy time seizing every possession that they desire. Korea suffers from famine in a good year. With Japan's participation in the war, they began importing grain in large quantities from their colony Korea. They even swept up grain for domestic consumption in Korea. Therefore, Koreans are suffering in a good harvest. Yeah, quite a lot of abuse. A plan to invade Kichau. The military command reported they have written a plan to invade German Bay of Kichau in this war phase. Since the port has its importance over East Asian sphere, we need to consider to activate the plan and secure our position in the region. Yes, this is the important thing that Japan would actually prepare to launch, seizing the entirety of Shandong for itself. Beginning of the National Protection War. China is mobilizing once again. Their declaration of the Empire China has been the last straw for the Chinese people. Already exhausted of Hongshan Emperor's tyranny and broken promises of democracy, various factions have heeded the General Kai Yi's call to draw up arms and rise up against the injustice. Provinces all across the southern China have already declared allegiance to the newly founded National Protection Army, their forces getting stronger every hour. The Empire of China has declared the insurgency illegal and ordered the rebels crushed. It looks like China is going to have yet another civil war. This is the point in which China truly begins to rapidly break apart. Yep, rapidly fall apart. As this occurs, so too does the battle for Kichou. Good news has been reported that our infantry division finished the initial landings over Lungkao Shandong, which was selected for a key position to attack Kichou. Our navy will proceed and provide naval blockade and support barrage for the oncoming land battles. Local Chinese troops have been neutralized from our effort to take over German assets in Shandong region, including the railways. They had no resistance. All is going well. This, in turn, allows us to rapidly take over the entire region. Of course, it brings to mind then the question of what exactly is going to happen. Historically, the way that the Japanese treated the Chinese is that they had launched the 21 demands. Though the West made denouncements for it, China as a puppet state is a deal far too good to pass up. With their manpower and resources and our cunning and might, we would be an unstoppable force. Of course, if they reject our demands, we may have to either revise or prepare for a war, which would most certainly unify the dissenting powers. See, there's the problem. Historically, what happened is that Japan did launch the 21 demands, but there was so much pushback from the United States, from Britain, from others who were outraged that Japan would do this in a time of conflict that they basically not cut all ties, but raised enough hell that the Japanese actually backed down, and they revised the 21 demands down to the 13 demands, which didn't quite make China a puppet. But the thing is, even though they did get some of their demands acceded to, and this was a nice thing, because they initially gave the 21 demands, that actually alienated Japan from the beginning from the other powers. Which, yeah, they were still on good terms, but they weren't really trusted nearly as much after that. To that end, considering that more efforts are going to be focused in the north, we will actually say that Japan did not go and give the 21 demands. They didn't try to piss off the other powers nearly as much. From the outset, though China would be in no position to resist Japan, the rest of the European powers as well as the United States are unified in threatening us with an embargo in case of going too far with China. If we simply demand an inheritance to the German economic sphere, we can expand our influence in China without damaging our position. From here, there's really not actually much that Japan is going to be able to do. Things are going to proceed as normal as they did in our own timeline, except Japan is not going to alienate nearly as many forces, and they will be able to effectively build things up here in the north, consolidating their position. Now, we pretty much have to bide our time and wait for, World War I to end, sort of. Now, the other limitation that we're going to put on ourselves here is that we're never actually going to enter war economy. This is something that Japan didn't do. They didn't want to enter a state of war economy. They had such an easy time over here in the East. There was no reason to make the population suffer, increase taxes in order to be able to pay for things because, well, there wasn't really much opposition for them in the first place. One of the things that is fascinating about this time is that Japan and Russia would sort of kind of get along during this, even though they'd been at war pretty much just a decade earlier. They would sign an agreement where they basically both respected the territorial integrity of each other. But interestingly enough, that doesn't necessarily apply when the Russian Empire no longer exists, as it won't in like a year. Now, it happened a little bit earlier in this time versus what it actually was supposed to, but eventually Russia is going to break out into revolution. Simultaneously, I realize here this is actually really bad for me. The Ottomans lost, which in turn means they're out of the war and Russia has control of Constantinople. I don't know why that is actually happening here. I should have been paying more attention so I could have stopped that. But yeah, everything is about to go to crap for Russia. And so, my friends, there it is, the Bolshevik coup. Another uprising would take place in Russia last night. The Bolsheviks would take the offensive and seize the seat of the provincial government, the Winter Palace. All remaining ministers were arrested, and the palace's defenders voluntarily surrendered to the Soviet. The flames of socialist revolution spread like wildfire throughout Russia, causing shockwaves that reverberate across the entire world. However, the scattered forces of the provisional government and other groups are ready to repulse the Soviets, with whom they have fundamental disagreements. Perhaps, if Vladimir Lenin succeeds in defeating his opponents, we can begin to contemplate world revolution. No. The big thing that happens here in this case is that the immediate thing that the Allies or the Entente would want to do is to launch an intervention in order to bring back the provisional government, to have the Russians join in on the front and actually put more pressure on the Germans. And so, with German victory secured in the east, they turn their attention westwards. However, that only is the beginning for Japan. Now, it is here that we have an opportunity to intervene in the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution has opened up a nice chance for Japan to earn yet more mainland territory. The port of Vladivostok and the region formerly known as Outer Manchuria could easily be occupied under the justification, of course, that we need to continue the Siberian intervention. The Westerners, as usual, may frown upon this. But considering how much support we arguably could have, because we did not pressure China too much, in the scenario, there may be greater support that is offered, that Japan is able to mobilize more than the original 70,000 forces that they sent in. Perhaps in this timeline, maybe it's double that, 140,000 or 200,000. Who really knows how much more we could have, considering that we have like 1.2 million. The suspicious movement of the Koreans, the Korean independence movement organization called the Korean Liberation Association, has been caught in our investigation network. Their main activity was raising military funds. Arrest them. Completely crush them. Now it is time for the intervention in Transbaikal. In order to separate the far eastern territories from Russia, we need to create a buffer state under our protection. We are in negotiations with the Ataman Semenov and have offered him the opportunity to lead such a state. Additionally, we provided significant assistance to Ataman Semenov in forming a special Manchurian detachment that operates against the Bolsheviks in Transbaikalia. During the attack on Chita, dear God, I cannot speak. During the attack on Chita, Semenov's detachment was supported by a combined brigade of Imperial Japanese Army led by Lieutenant General Fujiya. Together, they entered Chita as part of a combined vanguard. After capturing Chita, the Imperial Army's 3rd Division detached Major General Yukara's detachment from its forces to occupy the Amur Railway, which has been completely cleared of Red forces. Siberia will be ours. Now, it is time for the Siberian intervention. With the Russian Civil War in full progress, Japan must intervene in Siberia. Though the White Russians are no friends of ours, they make a far better neighbor than the Soviet Union. Besides, who knows what we might pick up in the expedition? Yeah, Japan's goal in this time was, I believe, to expand all the way over to it was some kind of lake. I think it was Lake. Was it here in Transbaikal, or was it, they wanted to take a huge swath of territory here of Siberia in order to be able to get the resources and create a buffer state between them and Russia, or in this case, the Soviet Union. With that, the Siberian intervention begins. A disease like no other. No. Influenza is not going to affect Japan. That's not what's going to happen here. Perhaps because of the better industry and better trade deals that Japan would have had, they would have had more rifles to be able to send to support the whites in the scenario. Maybe, with greater intervention, they're able to actually stabilize things and create more havoc for the Soviets. HOI4 clique intends to set up a friendship. One of the Chinese local governments tries to set up a diplomatic relation with our foreign contact in China. Since China's main government is unfunctional, it's not bad to have some greets with these backup government. One day, somehow, they might replace Peking and unify all of China under their administrative power. Well, sure, why not? Increase Japanese influence. Okay, not gonna lie, I was actually expecting from this mod that it would allow me to intervene, and it hasn't really done that, which is surprising. Like, I'm able to send a whole bunch of weapons and different things in here, but I'm not actually able to do anything. Oh, hey, look, Lenin got shot. Sucks to suck. Kolchak becomes the supreme ruler of Russia. In Russia, a White Guard coup established the country as a dictatorship. Monarchist officers overthrew the provincial government of the Social Revolutionaries and elected Admiral Alexander Kolchak as the supreme ruler of Russia. The expelled government called for the struggle against Kolchak and the Bolsheviks. They were between the hammer and the anvil and no longer able to decide the fate of Russia. Well, yes. Now, it appears that the Soviets are beginning to capitulate the varying different little entities. And so, by the end of 1918, here it is, the armistice. The Central Power is not able to fight any further, and they collapse. It is from here, then, that all efforts would be made to try and stabilize the East. Here we have, then, the Taisho democracy. As Japan continues to militarily intervene in Siberia, so too then begins the invasion of Manchuria. With the Allies absolutely exhausted from the war and with the ongoing Russian intervention, this means that Japan is able to do pretty much whatever it is that it wants. With that, we launch an invasion into Manchuria. A railway bombing occurred in a section of the South Manchuria Railway on which Japan had jurisdiction. The Empire of Japan's Kwantung Army declared this to be the work of the Chinese army and launched an attack on Manchuria, but public opinion is not very positive for Japan. Also, the supposition that the bombing was a Japanese made-up play is gaining strength, which, who cares? Attack. Now, of course, the United States is still likely to be very annoyed with us, but, it doesn't really matter here at this point. Japan is going to have at least more support behind it than it would in our own timeline. So, Manchuria and more potentially being able to take a larger puppet state here in the east in order to build a buffer. From there, we are then able to move rapidly westward. Okay, so, at this point, I've been playing this now for the, past 4 hours. Soviet Russia is actually losing. I didn't expect that to happen. It looks like Japan supporting the White Russians too much actually ends up stabilizing them, amazingly enough. Yeah. And I can't justify or declare more wars in order to conquer things. So I'm just supposed to bleed out here. Awesome. Lovely stuff. I'm so happy right now. I'm trapped also in a really crappy post-war economy, which doesn't really make much sense because Japan didn't, I didn't fully join in, so I shouldn't be limited by this. Okay. This mod is so restrictive. I love, it's a cool mod, it's a fun mod, but oh my god, it's so restrictive. Please don't tell me after I spend all these hours I'm gonna be stuck. I swear to god. I can't even maintain a large army because of this. I swear this mod This freaking mod. Oh my god, and now the Soviets who can't even beat the whites are getting destroyed by the Poles. In this world that we have created, the Russian, we're gonna say imperialists in here, imperialists, they were able to really make a strong comeback. They were able to rally the forces of the Slavs, and from that, put pressure on Moscow. I don't, what am I supposed to say here at this point here, all right? Like, the Japanese intervention succeeded, but at what cost? Literally, at what cost? Oh my god, whoa, what the hell? What is happening with the Ukrainian Republic? What? It's Soviet Ukraine. Oh dear god, that's about to cut Poland off, isn't it? Oh my god, it did. Oh, okay, well, there's the establishment of Poland, so peace on that side, and now the Soviets have... Okay, there's the Greco-Turkish War. Everything is getting super messy here really fast. Really, and I still can't form Manchuria. I still can't do this. It won't allow me to do anything. Why can I not do anything? Execution of the... Oh my god, I can't... It won't... It won't let me do anything. And now the Soviets are actually making a comeback. Now that's actually happening. And I can't... It won't let me do anything. Ah! Oh my god, they don't even have any mill. They don't get any mills. They don't get anything. So they can't produce anything, which means that the Soviets are just gonna... Okay, now it's actually gonna allow... Is it gonna allow me to intervene? Can I do anything? Please? Please? Oh my god, the Soviets are flooding through. They're actually flooding through. It's over that fast. No. Why? Why will it not let me do anything? Can I change things? I'm in the roaring 20 now. Okay. I still can't get rid of this. I can't get rid of this economy. Why? The return of Shandong. We're not allowed to maintain the occupation of Shandong since we signed the Washington Treaty. This mod is so restrictive. It is so freaking restrictive. I don't even care. Just send all of my resources to Transbaikal here. I literally do not care. So if you... It didn't even give me an opportunity. It didn't let me do anything. It actually did not let me do anything. The Far Eastern Republic, it doesn't even give me an opportunity to be able to take anything over. I swear to God. I swear to God, I did this entire thing, and it still doesn't work. A call to arms from the white state of Transbaikal. Now they're actually able to join. Now I'm actually able to... Are you freaking kidding me? After forcing me to get rid of all my troops. I hate this. I hate this mod. I hate this thing. I hate this so much. Oh my god, now it disappeared. It only happened because another power from there declared war on them, which means that I swear to God, I've been doing this for 6 hours. I've been doing this for 6 hours and the mod wouldn't let me. Screw you. No. No. You know what? Activate occupation. I don't care. No. No. I know I don't actually get anything, but we're drawing this story, damn it. In the aftermath of a massive intervention on behalf of the Empire of Japan, a puppet state is set up in the Far East. It is not a republic, rather it is a state that is under the control of the Japanese emperor, or more specifically, a long-forgotten member of the Russian imperial family, which was largely lost, but an element of that is married into the Japanese imperial family, and a series of puppet states are set up here in Siberia. From there, Manchu Kuo is the puppet state to control things within China, and then this new Siberian state is here in the north to be able to serve as a buffer against Russia. In the aftermath of such a conflict, this would be a state that would likely be propped up by the West, though the United States and others would hate the idea of strengthening Japan too much. Simultaneously, they would see communism as a massive threat, and as such, the US would likely aid Japan in this effort, even as Japan at this time had not gone full-on fascist yet. So yeah, there we go. I can't even spin anything off of this anymore. This is so much more broken than it ever should have been. I hate this. My friends, thank you all so much for watching. Why did you make me do this scenario? Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and put your own scenarios down in the comment section below of what it is that you'd like to see next. I can only imagine that what would end up happening in the aftermath of this is that, well, the army would actually be the significantly stronger entity within Japan rather than the navy. Considering how much of Siberia they would control, this means that the riches of Siberia would be able to be exploited, which means that the army would maintain a much greater role and greater prominence than the navy, thus meaning that Japan would never get involved taking, an alliance with Germany and Italy and going after the southern territories held by Europe. Instead, they would strive to create greater relations between the Europeans, or rather with the Europeans, I should say, and then from there use that in an effort to stabilize their own empire as they would be under threat of the Russians. The Russians, in turn, would constantly be watching out for an attack again from the east, which may actually from that put them in a weaker position when Germany ultimately invades them, as they would have to have forces stationed over here in order to be able to protect against Japan, which would constantly then have to deal with the threat of communist guerrillas going after them. Yeah, that's the end of that. I'm done here, guys. It's been actually 7 hours at this point. Thank you all for watching. Goodbye. Dear God.